Most people think they're prepared, but there's a problem. It's not a food problem, it's a planning problem. Before people run out of food, they run out of usable meals. Once you see the difference, you'll never look at your pantry the same way again. And I'm going to show you a simple way to test it in the next couple of minutes. Hey, it's Jera with Wicked Prepared. If you've been stocking up food, putting things away here and there, trying to be a little more prepared, you're already ahead of a lot of people. But there's a gap almost everyone has between what they have and what they could actually live on. And today, I'm going to walk you through a very simple way to see that gap clearly, because once you see it, you can fix it. And I'm also going to show you a quick exercise you can do at home that will immediately tell you whether you're actually prepared or you just feel like you are. Most people measure their preparedness by how full something looks. A shelf full of cans, a pantry with extra boxes, maybe a few bins or totes stacked somewhere. And visually, it looks solid. But here's the problem. Your eyes are terrible at estimating duration. A full shelf might look like a lot of food, but in reality, it might only represent a few days of actual meals, especially once you stop supplementing with normal grocery store runs. So instead of asking, do I have a lot of food or do I have enough food, you have to ask, how many days can I actually feed my household with this without running out? This is really where things could start to break down. Most people don't think in terms of calories. They think in terms of items. They say, I've got 20 cans of this, I've got 10 boxes of that. But your body does not run on cans and boxes. It runs on calories. Most people vastly overestimate how far their emergency food stash will actually stretch. So let's make this real for a second. The average adult needs roughly 2,000 calories a day. Some people more, some people less, but that's a good solid baseline. So that means one person needs about 14,000 calories per week. So if you're a family of 4, that's 56,000 calories every single week. Now here's where it gets interesting. When you actually start looking at the labels, a lot of what people store isn't nearly as calorie dense as they think. A can of vegetables, for instance, might only be 100 to 200 calories for the whole can. A box of something might seem like a lot, but it stretches less than you expect. So you can have what looks like a full pantry and still only have a few days of actual energy. Here's a simple exercise I want you to try. And this is where most people kind of have that aha moment. Sit down with what you already have at home, your shelf-stable prepper pantry items, and make an actual meal plan, a menu of sorts. Plan out your meals for a 14-day stretch. 2 weeks, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Don't guess, actually write it out. What am I eating on Monday morning? What am I eating Tuesday night? And not just the name of the meal, but actually write down all of the ingredients or the components that you would need to make that meal. Make sure that you already have everything you need for all of those meals. Don't assume you can just run to the store. Use what you have. Most people don't even make it through the first week before they realize they've got gaps. Meals that don't quite come together, not enough ingredients to complete full meals, or they're just repeating the same thing over and over. That's when it becomes real. And even if you can stretch it on paper, a lot of times it only works if everything goes perfectly. If portions are small, nobody eats extra, if nothing goes wrong. But real life doesn't work like that. People get hungrier under stress. Kids snack more. Heck, I snack more during stressful times. You burn more energy because you're doing things manually. You're doing cleanup work, whatever it may be. So what looked like 2 weeks of food might realistically only be 7 to 10 days. I've created a free printable worksheet that you can use to help organize this task. I'm going to link it down below, and I'll also put it on the screen for those who can't access the description or the pinned comment. If neither of those works for you, you can text menu to my number and I'll send you a text with a link to the printable. Download it, print it out, and use it to plan out your menus. Let it guide you as you fill in those gaps, and then keep it handy. Use it as a reference when the time comes that you need to put it into action. During times of emergency, things tend to be hectic and people are stressed. Our brains don't always work as well under those conditions. So having everything mapped out ahead of time lets you put one foot in front of the other without too much thought. It can help keep things going until you can get your feet under you or the situation resolves. Now let's talk about one of the biggest gaps that I see over and over again. And this is one that a lot of people don't realize until it's too late. Protein. Most people build their pantry around carbs, rice, pasta, oats, snack foods, and those are great for energy, but they're not enough on their own. The average person needs somewhere between like 50 to 70 grams of protein per day. It depends on body size and activity and a lot of different things. But in a stressful situation, you might actually need more because your body is working harder. You're doing more physically and you're under more stress and strain. So go back to that 14-day plan that you made earlier. How much protein is actually in those meals? And not just, oh, there's some beans in there, but real consistent protein every single day. Because this is where most people hit a gap. And it's not just about quantity, it's about quality. Not all protein sources are equal. Animal-based proteins like meat and eggs, dairy, those are considered complete proteins. They contain all of the essential amino acids that your body needs. But a lot of plant-based options like beans on their own, for instance, don't. They're not a complete protein. Now, of course, you can combine foods to make complete proteins, but that requires planning. And in a real situation, most people aren't thinking that far ahead. So what happens is people might feel full, but they're not actually getting what their body needs. Energy drops, strength drops, focus drops. And after a few days, you start to feel it in a really very real way. The good news is it's one of the easiest gaps to fix, and it doesn't require completely redoing everything you've done. It just means being intentional about adding in reliable protein sources, things that are easy to store, easy to use, and things that you'll actually eat. So again, go back to that 14-day plan. Look at each day and ask yourself, where is my protein coming from? And if you can't answer that clearly, that is a gap worth fixing because calories keep you going, but protein keeps you functioning. Even if you dial all that in, there is another layer to this that most people overlook because none of that food works without water. Water is the one that everyone talks about. Store water, store water. You've heard it 1,000 times. But very few people actually sit down and figure out how long their water will actually last. Not just for drinking, but for cooking, for basic hygiene, even something as simple as rehydrating food. Because water disappears a lot faster than people expect. A general guideline is about 1 gallon per person per day, but that's not luxury. That is survival level use, bare minimum. So for a family of 4, bare minimum, that's 4 gallons per day, 28 gallons a week, so it adds up fast. 2 weeks, you're already at 56 gallons. A month, over 100 gallons. And that's where most people hit a wall because storing that much water isn't easy. A lot of us don't have that much space. We actually got a comment recently that I think a lot of people are wondering about. Do you really need to store that much water? Can you store less if you have a way to filter it and you've got a water source nearby? And on the surface, that sounds completely reasonable. And there is some truth to that. But this is where people get tripped up. Yes, you absolutely should have a way to filter or purify water. In fact, you should have more than one way. And you should definitely know where your nearest water sources are. Because long term, you're probably never going to be able to store everything that you might need when it comes to water. So yes, filtration and access matter. They do matter a lot. But here's the part that people don't think through. There are a lot of situations where going out to get water is not going to be as simple as it sounds. What if it's not safe to leave your home? What if the weather's bad or the water sources are all frozen over? What if you're sick or someone in your family is sick and you need to stay there with them? What if everyone else has the same idea you have and now that water source isn't as accessible, as plentiful, or as clean as you thought it was going to be? What if it's contaminated or it dries up or it's further away than you remembered? We tend to picture the best case version of these scenarios. I'll just go down the road and filter some water. No problemo. But real situations are rarely best case. They are inconvenient, they are unpredictable, and sometimes they're not safe. So the goal isn't to choose between stored water or filtration, it is to layer them. Stored water buys you time. Filtration gives you sustainability and access gives you options. This is also where something like a rain catchment system can make a big difference because now you're not relying on leaving your home. You're collecting water where you are and then filtering it. That is a much more controlled situation. Even something as simple as thinking through it. If I had to stay right here for 2 weeks, could not leave my house, how would I handle water? That's a completely different level of preparedness. So go back to that 14-day plan that you made earlier and now ask yourself, how much water would I need to actually support this menu? Not just to drink, but to cook the meals, to clean up afterwards, and so on and so forth. That's where things usually click because water isn't just another category on its own. It is the thing that makes everything else work. And when you really start to map it out, most people realize that they don't have nearly as much margin as they thought. You can have all the calories, all the protein, everything mapped out perfectly, but it's still going to fall apart if you don't have the water to support it. And once you see that, you start to notice something else. Even if you've solved the food and you've solved the water, most people still haven't solved the part where it actually becomes a meal. How are you going to cook it? This is one that a lot of people don't think through all the way because it's easy to assume I've got food, I'm all set. But most of the food that people store assumes normal conditions. It assumes power, a working stove, running water, convenience, all of those things that we take for granted. Take those things away and your options shrink fast. Now go back to that 14-day plan again. How many of those meals can you actually make without electricity, without relying on your kitchen the way that you normally do? And this is where I see a lot of people fall into kind of a false sense of confidence. They'll say something like, oh, I'll just use some candles and a muffin tin, or I'll figure it out. And realistically, that's not a real cooking plan. Can you warm something up with a few candles? Maybe, but you're not cooking meals for a family that way. Not in any kind of sustainable or practical way, at least. What you need is something that's actually designed to cook. For me, one of the simplest options is a butane stove. They're compact, they're easy to use, they work well indoors as long as you have proper ventilation. I've also started using a dual fuel setup recently that has butane and propane just for the flexibility. There's also other options that you could use indoors inside your house: alcohol stoves, sterno fuel setups, things that are simple, portable, and don't rely on your electric stove or your microwave. And yes, if conditions allow, you can also cook outside if you've got a grill or a fire pit or something like that. But once again, that assumes that it's safe to be outside, that the weather's cooperating, and that you're just able to do it. And that's not always the case. So it's a good option, but it should definitely not be your only plan. Just like with water, this isn't about having one solution. It's about having layers, something simple and reliable for everyday backup, and then additional options if needed. So go back to your 14-day plan one more time and ask yourself, how am I actually cooking each of these meals? Not in theory, but in a real situation. And if you can't answer that clearly, there's another gap that you need to think about. And this is something I'm actually going to break down in more detail in a future video: different ways to cook without power, what works, what doesn't, and what's actually practical in a real situation. So take a moment to check and make sure that you're still subscribed to the channel, or hit that button if you've never subscribed before so that you don't miss my future uploads. There's one more hidden failure point, and this is the one that almost nobody accounts for. Even if you technically have enough food, if it's bland, if it's repetitive, if it's boring, or if it's something that your family won't actually enjoy eating, people are going to start eating less. They're going to skip meals. They're just going to lose interest. And over time, they'll start to lose hope. People will say, well, if you're hungry enough, you'll eat anything. But the people who say that usually haven't had to live that way for very long. This is something called food fatigue, and it is a real thing. It might sound small, but it builds over time. And then energy drops, morale drops. And now you've got a situation where people have food, but they're not functioning the way that they need to. Because it's not just about having enough food, it's about having food that you can actually keep eating day after day. And that means variety, and it means things that taste good. Even simple things like seasonings, ways to change the flavor, ways to make those same ingredients feel like a different meal. Those small details make a much bigger difference than people expect. So when you step back and look at all of this, the calories, the protein, the water, how you're cooking, and now how it's actually going to feel to eat that food every single day, you start to see the difference between having food and actually being prepared. And the goal here is not to overwhelm you at all. It's to give you clarity, because once you can see the gaps, you can fix them. And most of the time, it doesn't take as much as people think. It just takes being a little more intentional about how you prepare. The simple exercise of writing out an actual menu plan for your emergency food storage is a great way to move to the next step beyond just randomly storing foods from a list and towards true preparedness. Use what you learn to fill the gaps and bulk up on calorie-dense and protein-dense foods, and create a real confidence in how you're actually going to feed your family. Preparedness isn't about how much you have, it's about how well it actually works when you need it. If you made it all the way to the end of the video, leave me a dinner plate emoji down in the comments so I know you made it all the way through. And if you want to know the top 10 most important spices to stockpile to avoid food fatigue, check out this video next. I'm Jara with Wicked Prepared. Survive today, thrive tomorrow. We'll see you next time.